RFK Racing is still expected to expand to a 3-car operation in 2025 with Ryan Preece driving a 3rd car, and Zane is still likely joining from Motorsports in 2025. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories to talk about today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight on those really quickly. First, going to talk about the NASCAR Cup race at Watkins Glen, as it was reported by Seth Egger that this is the first time in playoff era where no playoff driver finished inside the top 5 since 2004 in any of the top 3 series. That is absolutely wild, considering that this race is very competitive earlier today. You had a lot of drivers up front competing for the win and the victory that weren't guys that were in the playoffs. Guys like Chris Buescher, Shane Van Gisbergen, Ross Chastain, and even Carson Osbar were the main guys competing for the win up front. It's an absolute wild stat and absolute craziness, and hopefully that means that we can see some of the playoff guys get back up front. I do expect that to change going into this week, but at the same time, it's absolutely wild to see this stat and some crazy numbers, all things considered. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about RFK Racing. As it was reported, I believe, by Joseph Zirgley or Trey Ryan, that this is the first time that 2 RFK Racing cars have won any season since 2013. Those back in 2013 were Greg Biffle and Carl Legwards. This is, like I said, the first time in 11 years this has happened. We saw Chris Buescher win earlier today at Watkins Glen, and Brad Keselowski went to victory lane earlier this year at Darlington. RFK Racing is definitely back. This organization has continued to show a lot of great pace and speed on a week-by-week basis, and I feel like Buescher has been close to winning races so far this year. And Brad Keselowski could have multiple wins as well, same with Chris Buescher. So they're definitely back. They're continuing to grow. That's why it's likely they're going to be a 3-car team next year. Congratulations to RFK Racing on getting their 2nd win of the year. A big deal for the RFK Racing group, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Right before the IndyCar Championship race took place and the NASCAR Cup Series race took place this weekend, you had the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Formula 1. And this race is very compelling and interesting. Early in the race, Charles Leclerc completely dominated, but Oscar Piastri made a very big bonsai move about halfway through the race and got the lead from Charles Leclerc. And for the next 10 to 15 laps, Charles Leclerc was desperately trying to make the move to get by Oscar Piastri for the win. Unfortunately, the tires fell off near the end of the race, and Oscar stormed out to a pretty big lead. On the last lap of the race, there was a crash, or with 3 or 4 laps to go, there was a crash between Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez, ending the race under virtual safety car. That would end the race, both of them taking out of contention of getting a podium or at least a top 4 finish. This would lead Oscar Piastri to pull out enough of a lead, and coming off the corner, Oscar Piastri picks up his 2nd win of 2024 and his 2nd career victory. This is definitely a well-earned win. Unlike the race that he won not too long ago, this is a well-deserved win for Oscar. He absolutely earned it. He put up a really strong clinic today. Congratulations to him on winning his 2nd career Formula 1 race. He absolutely deserved it, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about IndyCar on NBC. With the national race concluding for NBC earlier today, that was the final race on IndyCar on NBC. Remember, they will be transitioning over to Fox starting in 2025. It's been an incredible run. It all started at Versus, then it went to the NBC Sports Network, and then eventually it went to NBC, where pretty much every single IndyCar race until the end was on the main NBC and also on Peacock as well. It's sad to see IndyCar and NBC no longer being a thing. I hope all the people working at NBC get a chance and opportunity to go over to Fox, but most likely people that are working on the NASCAR and Fox side of things are probably going to be working on this network. So that's a little disappointing. But nonetheless, it was really good to see the history of it. It's sad to see they're going away, but at the same time, they had an amazing and fantastic and great run. And it's sad to see, though, that they're no longer going to be around after today, which is sad, but it's not shocking, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the CW. Now, this past weekend's Xfinity Series race at Watkins Glen was the final race on the NBC Sports Network or with NBC. Obviously, starting in 2025, the Xfinity Series is going to be racing on the CW. But remember, the first Xfinity Series race on the CW is actually going to be starting this weekend at Bristol Motor Speedway, which will be on a national network. Now, keep this in mind. NBC Sports is still going to be basically doing the production for this. It's just, and basically the people working over there, like Steve Letarte, Rick Allen, and Jeff Byrne, are still going to be part of the commentary team. The only difference is the network that they're going to be on. It's sad to see NBC no longer doing like the TV side of things, but at the same token, same time, the CW is probably going to provide a lot of people an opportunity to watch since it's basically going to be on national TV. So I think it's going to be really huge for the Xfinity Series as they continue to grow and develop. It's really huge to see this nonetheless, and pretty awesome that they're going to be on the CW starting this weekend at Bristol Motor Speedway. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Conor Zillich. Now, we do have a couple of Conor Zillich stories to talk about in today's episode. The first one we're talking about is his ARCA win. Conor Zillich put up a dominating clinic and picked up the ARCA win on Friday at Watkins Glen. Not only did Conor Zillich win, he completely dominated. Before the first ARCA break, he had a 15-second lead. And then after the second ARCA break, he dominated and won it by 11 seconds ahead of William Swatch. And Swatch is almost 5 to 10 seconds ahead of Brandon Jones. Conor Zillich is the next big thing in my opinion. It was completely domination. It wasn't even close. He dominated the race on Friday. He absolutely earned the win, deserves the win in my opinion. Congratulations to Conor on getting it done. I think Conor Zillich has a future being a Cup Series champion one day. I know it's just ARCA, but congratulations to Conor Zillich on getting it done. It's a well-deserved win, and he absolutely earned it with a dominating win in the ARCA race, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Green. Now, Austin Green did compete in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race earlier this week and picked up a very strong 11th place finish at Watkins Glen. In all 5 of Austin Green's races, his worst finish, I believe, is 15th. And he's had 3 top 10 finishes during that time. And like I mentioned, 5 straight top 15 finishes. Austin Green is a very talented race car driver from the Trans Am team. He is the son of David Green, who's working as an official for NASCAR. If I'm Jordan Anderson Racing right now, I'm putting this guy in full-time next year. Because Austin Green has a lot of natural-born talent. He's very good in my opinion. And I think if you put him in this car, at least on the road courses, he'll at least give you a top 5 or top 10 shot. He was in the top 5, top 10 in portions of the Xfinity Series race, and I do think he deserves to be full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series next year. So I really hope it ends up happening that he's full-time next year. Is it going to happen? Who knows at this point? But if I'm him, I'm definitely signing Austin Green next year if I'm Jordan Anderson Racing. Maybe kicking Jeb Burton out at this point, even though Jeb brings a little sponsorship with him. But I would love to see Austin Green work with Jordan Anderson Racing in 2025 because he was very impressive this past weekend at Watkins Glen once again. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about some entries coming up for the next 2 weeks. Now, Chris and I put out a tweet earlier today discussing some very interesting entries that are coming up very soon. So Kyle Weatherman, who drove the 36 this past weekend, unfortunately to a last place finish, he will be back in the 36 car for multiple races throughout the remainder of this year. It's unclear how many races. I think he said about 4 or 5 races for the remainder of the year, as Josh Bilicki likely will be part of the 91 car. Speaking of Josh Bilicki, it was also reported by Chris Knight that he'll be in the 19 car at the Charlotte Roval in a couple weeks from now. Josh Bilicki drove the 19 car at Portland and honestly had a really good run going, was running in the top 5 up front before unfortunately getting involved in a crash near the end of the race. I think Josh Bilicki does have a really strong chance and opportunity to be very fast and very competitive at the Roval. Considering he's been pretty faster in the past at the Roval, I do think that Josh Bilicki will have a strong chance and a very strong opportunity to be super competitive and super quick. I think that both drivers are going to do well at their respective rides. I think Joey Gase also stated there's going to be 2 entries in the Joey Gase Motorsports group that's racing, so that's really exciting stuff for sure. And again, really cool to see that Weatherman will get a chance to drive the 36 for a few races, and Josh Bilicki's back in the 19. I do expect Bilicki, though, to be very competitive, and he might be a driver that you might want to pick the wings. I do think he's going to have a solid shot and a really strong opportunity to get the victory in that 19 car, because the 19 car has had good pace and speed so far this year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the IndyCar race in Nashville. While you have the NASCAR Cup Series race in Watkins Glen going on, which we're going to talk about the finish here in just a little bit, you had the IndyCar season finale at Nashville. The race started off very interesting. On lap number 12, Will Power, who was the only guy that really could beat Alex Palou in the championship, he came down pit road because his lap belt was loose. It's required those lap belts are tightened, otherwise you're going to get a penalty, I believe, in IndyCar. So he came down pit road and unfortunately lost 5 or 6 laps. He did get one of his laps back, but then lost it and fell 8 laps down by the end of this race. This would mean that Alex Palou would come off the corner and be your 2024 IndyCar Series champion. He joins a very elite club of drivers like Mario Andretti and Rick Mears, who have won 3 championships in the first 5 years. But there's also a race going on. Most of this race is dominated by Kyle Kirkwood early, but unfortunately he had a bad cycle when a caution came out, I believe, for Felix Rosenqvist. And then obviously there was a couple cautions late for Marcus Ericsson. Colton Herta played a strategy at the end. He came down pit road and got the race lead with 5 laps going. A great battle of Pat O'Ward. And coming off the corner at the end of the race, Colton Herta picks up his second IndyCar win of the 2024 season. I believe finished second in the IndyCar Championship this year. Well, Herta's going to be disappointed he didn't win the championship. He only lost it by 32 points. Had Alex Palou crashed out and finished in the back, I think he actually almost would have won the championship with how strong he was. It's a shame Colton couldn't get the championship done, but I think he's got to be looked at as a favorite for the championship next year with the pace and speed he showed. Congratulations to Herta on winning the next IndyCar race in Nashville. And once again, like I mentioned earlier, congratulations to Alex Palou on winning the IndyCar Championship and Colton winning the IndyCar race at Nashville, his first oval win in his IndyCar career up to this point. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about SVG. Now we got another SVG story to talk about here in just a second, but let's talk about the Xfinity Series race at Watkins Glen. I did a video covering this on the channel yesterday, but basically SVG qualified around 13th or 14th. He had some sort of water temp issue from what I've been told, and unfortunately had to go to the rear of the field because of the adjustments on the car. Now Shane recovered throughout the race and got up as far as 15th before the end of stage number 1, and of course coming down pit road. And he continued to move through the field, but he didn't really have the straight line speed. And then unfortunately on the final pit stop, he got a speeding penalty with about 15 laps to go and fell as far back as 24th after leading a few laps in the race. But he got a timely caution with about 6 laps to go for Matt DiBenedetto, who had an engine failure. He started moving back up to the field and was actually in the lead pack battling for the win, but Conor Zillich was so dominant and so strong that SVG could not get up there, and he lost a few positions with a lack of straight line speed. The caution comes out for a wreck behind him, and Shane comes off the corner and finishes in 5th place. SVG had a really solid day, all things considered. He was my pick going into the race to win. I thought he was going to sweep the weekend, which unfortunately didn't win the Cup race either. But I think this Shane put on a really solid performance, all things considered. Because again, he drove in the final 24 laps from about 24th to 5th. That is still really impressive and could have finished second had people not been running at him at the end of the race. He still did a very good job nonetheless. It's a shame he couldn't get the win, but I think it's still a really good day. He's finished in the top 5 in most of the races so far this year. He did a really solid job, again, all things considered, and I think it was pretty cool to see him have the pace and speed to contend. Again, he didn't have the shot at winning the race, which is unfortunate, but he still had a solid day. They're going to have to work on the call cars going forward, though, so I feel like the call cars have really been struggling this year, so hopefully they can get the call cars a lot better so that the racing can get better for them and SVG can get back to where he was. He did have a new crew chief for this race because remember, Bruce Schlicker left the organization very recently, but he still got a good run and finished in the top 5. So both Red Bull athletes ended up finishing in the top 5 this week. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Conor Zillich once again. As it was announced on Friday that Conor Zillich has officially signed on as a Red Bull athlete. He becomes the second active NASCAR driver to sign as a Red Bull athlete, with SVG being the other driver. And of course, Scott Speed does run with the Red Bull program and was the one that signed him very recently. This is a massive and huge signing for the Red Bull group. Obviously, drivers like Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez and Shane Van Gisbergen and other drivers are part of this Red Bull family. And maybe in the future this could lead him running in a Formula 1 car. I'm exaggerating, it's probably not going to happen. But it would be really cool for him to maybe get an F1 test in the future. When you think of drivers who have a lot of potential, people who can grow in the sport, Conor Zillich is the one that really could transcend NASCAR in a major and massive way. And I think having him behind the wheel and working with the Red Bull group is still a very excellent thing. There's probably going to be some entitlement stuff going forward, and his following is probably going to grow because Red Bull will promote their drivers and promote their growth. His Instagram following has gone up from like 10 or 11,000 recently up to over 20,000. And I think that number is going to increase as time progresses. And working with the Red Bull group is still a massive and huge deal. It's really huge for Conor. He absolutely has earned the right to work with them. I think he's got a really great future with them going forward. And like I said, congratulations. It's a well-earned opportunity for Conor to work with Red Bull going forward. I think his sky's the limit for Conor, and I think his future is very, very bright going into the future, in my honest opinion. He absolutely has got a future in motorsports going forward. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the battle between Chris Buescher and Shane Van Gisbergen once again at the end of the Cup Series race at Watkins Glen. Now, I kind of already talked about it on the channel in the SVG video I did yesterday, and of course, we're at the end of the race. On the final restart of the race, it was a great battle between Shane Van Gisbergen and Chris Buescher. Going down the long straightaway, going into turn number 1, Shane just got a little bit in the back of Chris Buescher, moved him a little bit, and got a huge run to the inside of Chris, and Shane actually got the race lead. And it looked like Shane was going to run off in the sunset and pick up his second career NASCAR Cup Series victory. However, going through the bus stop on the white flag with Chris Buescher basically honing in and closing in a little bit, Shane makes his first big mistake of the weekend so far by getting hard, well, at least on the Cup side. He gets hard into the outside wall a little bit, something breaks on the car near the end, and Chris has a fantastic run. They battle door to door, going through the corners. They have contact. They're beating and banging really, really hard. And Chris Buescher eventually, after the contact, gets a really good run and is able to pass Shane Van Gisbergen for the race lead. Shane does everything he can to try to catch Chris, but unfortunately he ends up drifting and losing a ton of ground, and Chris Buescher comes off the final corner and picks up his first win of the 2024 season and his 6th career NASCAR Cup Series win. After the race, Shane was disappointed in himself after the finish, but he actually went to congratulate Chris at the end of the race, gave him a handshake, continues to show how classy of a driver he is and how respectful of a race car driver he is. I know Brake Hard shared some of the radio communication, but he basically told him he wasn't going to dump him for the win. He might move him a little bit, but wasn't going to wreck him for the win. And that because both these guys have, I don't think Shane's really complained about it, but we know Chris has kind of complained about getting raced ridiculously. And I think that they both put on a really good show at the end of the race. It's another fantastic finish. That's one thing about 2024 so far, is there's just been so many amazing and iconic finishes this year. And the racing at times, while it might not have been amazing the whole entire time today, I think the racing has been very good this year at times. When the racing is good, it is absolutely incredible. And I think it was just a fun race overall as a whole, especially with the great battle we saw between two drivers who are really good at road courses. And it's also a feel-good win for Chris Buescher. Unfortunately, he did not make the playoffs this year, sadly, but Chris Buescher has been having a lot of strong runs, and I feel like he's going to be in a good position going forward to get some wins before the end of the year. He's going to be fast at Bristol, especially because he won there a couple years ago. He could definitely go back-to-back. Nonetheless, it's a huge deal for him. Congratulations to Buescher on the win, and it's just great to see these two drivers race against each other fair, hard, but clean. Great racing at the end, one of the best Watkins Glen finishes we've seen in recent years. It was a fantastic, fun, and great battle at the end, and it was good to watch two really good drivers battle for the win, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the 20 car for Joe Gibbs Racing. As there was reported by Dustin Albino, who works at JSki and NASCAR.com, that Ryan Truex will be behind the wheel of the number 20 car for this upcoming race at Bristol for the NASCAR Xfinity Series. In addition to that, Eric Almirola, who drove the 20 car this past weekend at Watkins Glen, he will be doing the final 7 races in the number 20 car for Joe Gibbs Racing this year. Ryan Truex made select starts so far in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. He actually picked up 2 wins in the number 20 car this year. He obviously won at Dover early in May and April, and then also picked up the victory at Daytona not too long ago. I would definitely love to see Ryan Truex get a chance and opportunity to be full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in the future. I think if you're an organization like JRM, I know he's going to be back part-time next year because Mark Truex Jr. is sticking around, though we'll talk about the racing etiquette here in just a little bit. but Ryan Truex absolutely deserves to be full-time. He's done a really good job in Xfinity. He's been very competitive pretty much every Xfinity start that he's had so far this year. It's a shame he's not full-time in Xfinity, but I think it's good to see him back behind the 20. As for Eric Almirola, remember he talked about us on the channel not too long ago. Eric Almirola had gotten suspended for a couple months and made his return at Indy in July and was in position to win. Unfortunately, this past weekend at Watkins Glen, he had some sort of toe link issue, got involved in a wreck, I believe, or something, and had some sort of engine trouble as well. That's been one of the biggest problems with Joe Gibbs Racing is their engine program. It's literally a TRD. Has been a big problem. But I think that Eric, especially at the final 7 races, Martinsville's there. He's the defending winner at that track. I think Eric Almirola could definitely win before the end of the year with how strong he's been at some of the tracks coming up. I certainly look at some of the races. I think Talladega is going to be a good race for him, considering Eric Almirola has been really, really good at Talladega in the past. I think both drivers could win this year, and I think it's going to be very fun to see which drivers end up winning in that 20 car, but I think that Ryan Truex and Eric Almirola are going to be very competitive in that 20 car, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Juan Pablo Montoya. Now, Juan Pablo Montoya made his NASCAR return this past weekend at Watkins Glen. Unfortunately, Juan Montoya's race did not go very well. He unfortunately finished outside the top 30 and 32nd because near the end of the race, he apparently had a flat tire and basically ended up going a lap down. He never really recovered at the end, ended up finishing outside of the top 30, which is a shame because Juan Montoya was putting up a very solid performance, all things considered, and was pretty competitive. Now, before the weekend had gotten started, he was actually asked about his future in NASCAR and could he ever come back. And Juan Pablo Montoya did say that he didn't rule out maybe coming back and doing another start if he wanted to. He did say before this race that it really would have depended on how things went. I think Juan Montoya would have been a lot more competitive had he not had that flat tire because, like I said, he was legit doing a very solid and great job, and I think he honestly should have gotten a top 15 or top 20 because he ran top 20 a lot of this race. But that flat tire cost him a shot and opportunity. They're playing the strategy correctly, and we're doing a great job. I really hope 20 through 11 in the future or another organization like Trackhouse, perhaps, considering Project 91 is going to be coming back next year or maybe coming back this year. We'll talk about Conor Zillich in a second. But I think Juan Montoya coming back and making another start in the future in the Cup Series this year would honestly be really great to see. And I hope they're considering it right now to get Project 91 back on the ground. I know they're waiting until next year, but if I'm 20 through 11, I'm giving this guy another opportunity. He's done really good in my opinion, and he deserves another shot and opportunity in Cup once again, at least on a one-off start. I think he could come back in 2025 for sure. Obviously, Montoya, he won 2 Cup Series races in his career, got an Xfinity Series win. He basically kind of joked this week and kind of was saying it was a joke that he had lost Brian Patty because Brian Patty went to, of course, work over with Clint Boyer in 2012, and then he got Chris Heroy, which Chris Heroy, we all know he's considered one of the worst crew chiefs in the history of Chip Ganassi and NASCAR in general. I know Juan did not get the finish that I think he deserved. He did say after the race today that he did have a lot of fun. He did wish things went a lot better for him, but at the same token, same time, I do think Juan Montoya had good speed in practice, and I think he still can do it if you give him the right opportunity and the right car. 20 through 11, they kind of struggled this weekend, unfortunately. Bubba Wallace didn't have a great race, and Tyler Reddick had some damage. It was never the same after that. I think Juan Montoya is a good driver, though. He's still one of the greatest drivers in motorsports all across the board. I know we hear the jet dryer jokes, but the jet dryer jokes have gotten really old, in my opinion. But I really hope in the future that Juan Montoya does get the chance again and an opportunity to be racing in NASCAR, maybe on a one-off in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Conor Zillich once again. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Xfinity Series race yesterday, Conor Zillich put up a dominating clinic in his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut. And there were a lot of very interesting facts that came out surrounding Conor Zillich's first win. Conor Zillich is the 7th driver to win from pole on their first start. Or win on their first start, actually, excuse me. And he's the first driver, I think, to win from pole and basically win the pole in 2 separate series. Now, like I said, he's the first driver to win on his debut and basically in 7th driver to do this. And the prior driver was Ty Gibbs back in 2021. There's a few other drivers that have won from the pole in their first start. But also, like I mentioned, he was the first driver to win from the pole. By the way, he's also the first driver in his debut in 2 different national series to win the pole. Because remember, he actually won the pole for the Truck Series race at Circuit of the Americas as well. And unfortunately just locked it up. And then after the race concluded, Dale Jr. actually called him, congratulating him on the win and the victory as well. Conor Zillich, in my opinion, is the best prospect we currently have in NASCAR. This is no disrespect to Corey Heim. I think Corey Heim is a fantastic prospect for sure. When I look at natural born and raw talent, he is the best guy out there. He's the only guy, in my opinion, in the lower series that's won an LMP2 class in the Rolex 24 and the Sebring 12 Hours. He also, of course, has won 5 ARCA races this season alone, almost more than William Sawalich has won this year. He's gone 5 for 6 this season as a whole in ARCA. He's won a Cars Tour race this year. Everything he gets behind the wheel of, he's quick. Not just on ovals and road courses, which his road course prowess is insane. Nobody could touch him yesterday. It was insane how dominant he was. And I think in the next couple of years, he'll be in Cup. I kind of said this on Twitter, or X as they call it now. I want to see Conor Zillich get an opportunity in Project 91. If you're this organization like Trackhouse, you're fielding a Project 91 car the next time you can, because Conor Zillich, in my opinion, he's ready to make his debut in Cup. I don't care at this point. He may not go out there and win, but I think a top 15 is definitely reasonable, and I think he could do a really solid and fantastic job. It's just so impressive to see what this kid can do. He's honestly phenomenal. And another crazy fact as well, there's only 3 active full-time Cup drivers that are still active today that were running in the Cup Series then. Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, and Mark Truex Jr. That is absolutely wild. And only being 18 and doing this kind of stuff, I don't think we've seen a raw talent at 18 be this good since Joey Logano and maybe even Kyle Busch. He's got all that potential, in my opinion, and I think he's going to be the future of NASCAR going forward. Again, I hope Conor Zillich gets to go Cup racing at some point this year, but I think by 2026 especially, I think he'll be full-time in the Cup Series or Trackhouse Racing, because I think he's going to be ready by that point, and I think he'll be very good once he does eventually go Cup Series racing in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the racing etiquette for this weekend at Watkins Glen. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Xfinity Series race and the NASCAR Cup Series race, you saw the racing this past weekend at Watkins Glen. Now, at the end of the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, it was looking like Conor Zillich was going to run away with the victory. But then with 6 laps to go, Matt DiBenedetto runs out of gas, or basically has an engine failure, and comes to a complete stop. And then the race completely turns into a bloodbath, and it turns into complete chaos at the end of the race. And we end up having 2 overtimes in the NASCAR Xfinity race. The race should have ended an hour prior to that, and it ended up going almost to darkness. It ended like an hour prior to darkness, which is absolutely wild. And then you get to the Cup Series race today, and you have just the race as a whole. They're wrecking on lap number 1. You've got guys taking each other out, dumping each other. Dale Hammer completely dumps Kaz Grau. You got Michael McDowell after race who's pissed off at Zane Smith. And then you've got Kyle Busch, who was very frustrated after the race. And you have that big wreck near the end of the event. I don't know what you do at this point. The Cup Series, the Xfinity Series, and the Truck Series especially, at the end of these races, not just on road courses, but at every type of track, it seems like the racing etiquette has completely gone out the window for the drivers. Mark Truex Jr. is absolutely right. He basically said, how can these drivers claim to be the best in the world and they race like that? And he's not wrong. Today, we broke a record for overtimes in the Cup Series in a season. We have had 28 races this year, points-paying races. 12 of them have basically been in overtime. So almost half the races this year have ended in overtime. It's absolutely wild. And I'm not saying we need to go back to having no overtimes or anything like that, but I think these drivers have just lost respect on the track, and it's a major problem. And I think it's leading to very sloppy racing, and these races are becoming frustrating. We had a great finish today in the Cup Series race, but the ends of these races are turning completely sloppy, and it's getting more and more frustrating to watch. Again, I don't want to go back to having no overtimes. Again, I know some want that, but I think maybe at some point in the future, maybe a limit could come back into play. And NASCAR might do that in the future. I wouldn't be surprised considering all the reaction fans are having. I've seen a lot more fans wanting it to end under caution or go to the scheduled distance, and I honestly wouldn't mind it. IndyCar doesn't. It really doesn't seem to be a problem all the time, so why not maybe consider it? I just think the racing etiquette has gotten a lot more sloppy, and things need to change going forward, because the racing etiquette is not going to get better until basically there's a way to kind of stop it. And unfortunately right now with the racing the way it is at the moment, I'm not sure if it's going to get better, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race earlier today, you saw the first lap wreck like I mentioned a second ago. Going to the bus stop on lap number 1, Corey LaJoie completely misses the corner and goes up and wrecks Kyle Busch and spins him out, causing a major melee that takes out drivers like Ryan Blaney out of contention, Brad Keselowski pretty much out of contention, Denny Hamlin out of contention, and other guys like Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Bubba Wallace completely fell out of contention. Now, on the radio, and shout out to Lost Kings for getting this radio communication, Kyle Busch basically was asked who ended up causing the wreck. His team basically tells him, you can guess who it was. And Kyle Busch says, you've got to be kidding me. Considering the fact that Kyle Busch and Corey LaJoie have already had issues before, because remember, go back to Pocono not too long ago, Corey LaJoie completely dumped Kyle Busch in the corner. It was definitely intentional, in my opinion, for wrecking him there. And this is now the second race in a row, or the second time this year, that Corey LaJoie has caused a wreck with Kyle Busch. And going back to Corey LaJoie, look, he had a really good day at the end of the day where he did end up finishing inside the top 10. Second top 10 in the last 3 weeks. I'll give him credit for that. What I won't give him credit for is the fact that his racing etiquette, he's completely gotten out of control. And he's a driver that's being considered to stay in the Cup Series next year. If you're going to be in the Cup Series next year, Corey, you have got to clean it up. There's been so many races this year where Corey LaJoie has done this. And he wasn't like this last year. That's what's wild. I don't know if the pressure got to him trying to find a job for 2025 at this point, which it sounds like he'd be going to Rick Ware Racing, by the way. But I don't know what Corey LaJoie is doing. I knew he was going to cause some stupid incident. He always qualifies well at these road courses. And like I said a second ago, he had a really good finish today. He ran up front a lot of the day, finished in the top 10, got up there because of strategy, of course, but he did end up having a solid run. If he could just clean up the etiquette and stop wrecking people, I think a lot more fans would be very happy. But it seems like every time we get out to the track, he's causing some sort of incident or some sort of wreck. And I think the drivers are getting tired of it. And now he won't get that respect going forward. And he's a guy who's in his mid-30s, by the way, and just got a second top 10 on a non-super speedway. He's got to clean it up going forward because I think he's got I think he does have talent. Whether a lot of people agree with me or not, that's fine. But if he can clean up the racing etiquette with all the stuff he did it last week, he got into Chase Elliott on pit road. I'm not saying it's fully his fault, but he was right there in position. He's got to clean up the racing etiquette going forward. I get Kyle Busch being frustrated and upset, but he wasn't the only Spire driver that someone got pissed out. We saw Zane Smith, Michael McDowell get into it. Remember, Michael McDowell's taking over that 71 car next year. So I don't know at this point what you do, but you've got to clean up the racing etiquette if you're in Corey LaJoie's position, because the racing etiquette that he's putting on is not good in my opinion and needs to clean it up. Otherwise, next year, he's not going to get the respect that he deserves, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Nick Sanchez. Now, we know that Parker Kligerman is expected and confirmed that he will not be racing full-time in NASCAR in 2025. And we kind of already talked about this on the channel. But it's been reported by multiple sources that Nick Sanchez is the favorite to drive the 48 car for Big Machine Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2025. There's rumors about Nick Sanchez maybe moving up. There have been some initial rumors he was going to drive a fourth Colleague Racing car for the 2025 season, but it sounds more than likely he's headed over to 48 car for Big Machine Racing. Now, Nick Sanchez does have some prior experience driving for Big Machine Racing. In 2022, before they settled in on having Parker Kligerman behind the wheel of the 48 car, Nick Sanchez made some select starts, and I remember where he actually ran very competitive and had some good pace or speed in that number 48 car. He qualified up front, was running in the top 5 right behind Ty Gibbs early in the race. I don't think he finished up front at the end, but he did have a solid day and did run up front in the early portion of the race. Nick Sanchez has been doing a really good job in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series this year. He's been very competitive, won 2 races so far, and has a really good chance and opportunity, and I think more than likely he is going to make the championship 4 in the Truck Series next year. Now, do I think that Nick Sanchez will do better than Parker Kligerman? I don't know at this point. We know that Nick Sanchez can get the best out of equipment. There's no denying that. He's done that with the Rev Racing organization this year, but I'm not really sure he's going to go out there and win. Now, he could prove me wrong and run better on ovals, and I think he's definitely going to run better on ovals than Parker, but I think Nick is a driver that is deserving to move up. And if he does truly move up to the NASCAR Xfinity Series full-time next year, he's going to be joining a very elite rookie class. We already know Conor Zillich is going to be full-time. He just picked up the win this weekend at Watkins Glen. We know Christian Etiquette is driving the 16 car for Colleague Racing. And there's a really good chance and possibility that there's a couple other rookies that are going to get announced. We've been hearing that William Swalch might be full-time next year. We're hearing that Taylor Gray might be full-time in Xfinity. And we're also hearing that potentially Carson Quaffle could be full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series next year. I think Nick Sanchez is someone who has a lot of potential, and I think he's someone who can truly get the best out of equipment regardless of what series he ends up running for. I think he's a really good driver for sure, and I do certainly expect him to be very competitive and very fast regardless of what ride he ends up getting into. But he's deserving of a full-time ride in my opinion in Xfinity. The question is, he takes the 2-truck next year if he goes full-time. Does Rev Racing kind of shut their program down, or does that Rev Racing group move up with him next year? Because it sounds like if he does move up to Xfinity, which Breakart had reported, Rev Racing is going to find a way to continue work with him. I think it's very likely you see Rev Racing have a truck program again. Maybe Andres Perez goes full-time in trucks. We know he made his truck series debut with Spire not too long ago at Gateway, and I would have to imagine he's probably going to make some truck starts before the end of the year to try to evaluate how he's going to do. But I think Nick Sanchez absolutely deserves an opportunity to move up next year, and it sounds like more than likely that is going to happen. I think Nick will do a pretty solid and great job, and I certainly hope he does get the chance and opportunity to run well with Big Machine Racing in 2025. It sounds like he's the favorite to get this seat for 2025, which I think he's earned a right for that seat, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Aaron McLaren. Now, we kind of talk about Aaron McLaren on the channel very recently, but they actually were on Series 7 NASCAR Radio not too long ago on Friday. And I believe it was Larry McReynolds or Daniel Trotta who run that program. They actually asked him, Zach Brown, who is the owner of Aaron McLaren, the CEO of the organization, and asked, are you guys interested in staying in NASCAR, having a partnership with an organization and maybe running the Daytona 500? Well, Zach Brown actually responded that he's interested in running the Daytona 500 with this organization, and he said it'd be pretty cool for Aaron McLaren to be in NASCAR. Aaron McLaren and McLaren as a whole has had a ton of success in motorsports over the last few years. I just talked about it not too long ago. Oscar Piastri picked up his second Formula One win of the year. So far, McLaren has picked up 4 wins across the board for both their drivers. And most recently in IndyCar, Pat O'Ward has picked up 3 wins there. And we know they're very interested in bringing Pat O'Ward over to NASCAR. And we know that Aaron McLaren in IndyCar, they're partnering with Hendrick Motorsports once again for a second time. We know Kyle Larson ran the Indy 500 last year, and Kyle Larson was super competitive. Unfortunately, had that speeding penalty in the Indy 500, but Kyle Larson was super fast and super incredible and did end up leading a lap in the Indy 500. And I think Larson, depending on the weather, if the weather can hold off, I think Kyle Larson is going to have a strong shot and opportunity. Now, if Larson does have issues, we know that, or basically the weather comes into play once again like it did this year, Tony Khan is the most likely replacement driver to get behind the wheel of that seat. But I think it'd be really awesome to see Aaron McLaren come and run the Daytona 500. Now, who would most likely be the driver? Well, if they do run the Daytona 500, it's probably going to be Pat O'Ward or someone else in the organization like a Christian Lundgaard. I would expect, though, Pat O'Ward would be the driver. Now, I think for the growth of NASCAR, I think you put either Oscar Piastri or Lando Norris in, right? I know Lando has done some NASCAR stuff on iRacing in the past, and I think Lando Norris running the Daytona 500 would absolutely be huge for NASCAR as a whole, and I certainly would love to see this. I think it'd be really huge for the sport if this could end up happening, considering like McLaren and its success, because I don't think McLaren has been in NASCAR before, I believe. I could be wrong, and if it has happened, it's been many years since it's happened. I know some drivers who've driven for McLaren who, of course, have ran in NASCAR, like Juan Montoya, but I definitely want to see this happen. I want to see McLaren come over and run the Daytona 500 in the future, because I do think they could be very successful depending on what driver they get and what driver they end up using. And I think, obviously, they probably work at Hendrick Motorsports. Now, Hendrick, of course, they couldn't operate the organization because, remember, they do have that charter limit rule where they can only run 4 cars, and you can't run a 5th part-time entry, so McLaren would have to run it out of their own name, but Hendrick Motorsports could definitely build a car, and Hendrick certainly knows how to build not only a really fast car, but a competitive car. They just won the Daytona 500 earlier this year, and they almost got it with Alex Bowman, so I certainly do think that they would be pretty competitive there. Now, could they have a disappointment missing the race? That is certainly a possibility for sure, but I don't realistically think that is likely going to happen. So at this point, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens if we do see McLaren come in, but I definitely do think that McLaren could have a solid shot and opportunity being competitive, and I do hope in the future they do come and run the Daytona 500, because I do think they have a solid chance of being competitive if they do run the Daytona 500, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about 23XI Racing. Now it was reported by Jeff Gluck this weekend that Denny Hamlin said 23XI Racing has not had any discussions with NASCAR since last week, and he's not sure where the charter stuff goes from here. 23XI was one of the two organizations, of course, that did not sign the most recent charter agreement, and their future is a little uncertain currently at the moment. Now, many in the industry do believe that 23XI Racing will likely sign the charter agreement in the near future, but it's unknown when they are going to sign the charter agreement. Now, for what they said on the teardown earlier this evening, they kind of said that they still don't know where things are going to go, and NASCAR's going to take it slow, and we don't know where their approach is going to go from here. There is a chance that 23XI Racing could get their charters revoked if they don't sign the charter agreement by December 31st. Now, if they do sign the charter agreement by December 31st, their charters won't be revoked. However, if they do not sign the charter agreement by December 31st, same with Farmer Motorsports, NASCAR could have the opportunity, if they want to, they could go ahead and take their charters. We know there's some organizations like Junior Motorsports and even Andretti especially who are interested, of course, into coming to NASCAR, even though we do know Andretti most likely will probably partner up with Spire Motorsports when they do go ahead and make that move over, which they could switch that name from Spire to Andretti. But this could affect on drivers like Bubba Wallace, for example. Bubba Wallace is featured. He still has not signed a contract extension with 23XI Racing, and we do think he's more likely going to sign a contract extension with 23XI, but there's no guarantees at this moment that he is going to sign that charter agreement. Now, Tyler Reddick, I think, will likely stay with 23XI. I think there still will be around next year, but they could downsize from a two-car team to one-car team. Well, what does this mean for Riley Herbst as well? Riley Herbst is another driver that's featured still a little unknown at this moment right now. He was supposed to go over to 23XI. We still think they're going to expand to a three-car team, but there's no guarantees at this point that that is going to happen. If they go to court, for example, 23XI could be gone altogether, and all the drivers that were in part of that organization could be looking for somewhere else to go. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how things kind of play out. Now, ultimately, I think cooler heads will prevail in the future, but I do think that 23XI is going to sign it. I think this is distracting Denny Hamlin. The last couple races, Denny Hamlin's performance has been really dropping. Denny Hamlin did finish 23rd today at Watkins Glen, but man, he's just not in the game right now, and I think a lot of it is the distractions with the charter stuff going on. We know Mark Truex Jr. also was supposed to be part-time, and we know he wasn't really happy with the driving etiquette today. I don't know if he's going to run the Daytona 500 if they don't get it figured out. Because we know Joe Gibbs can't run a fifth part-time entry with the charter agreement we have unless they change the charter agreement recently. So he can't run the Daytona 500 in a fifth JGR car. He'd have to go to 23XI. Could those interesting things be put on hold because of this? It's unknown at this point. Again, I do think cooler heads will prevail because you don't want any headlines going out with this saying NASCAR and Michael Jordan are at odds and they don't sign this deal. I do think in the future you will see 23XI sign a deal, but I think it's going to be not till the end of the year, unfortunately. I would not be surprised if this goes to around Christmas time or goes to the break. But realistically, I don't see this going much farther than that. I think eventually they'll sign the deal. I think they'd love to have it signed for the two organizations. I think Front Row will likely sign it a lot sooner, but it's unknown at this point, no guarantees. I do think Front Row will sign first, and I think they'll sign in the near future, but we're waiting to see what NASCAR does in regards to that. We know they're interested in expanding. Of course, Carlos Kerber should come out of retirement, but we know some big stuff is happening down the road, and we'll see if 23XI Racing in the future decides to go ahead and sign the charter agreement. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about RFK Racing. Now, we've talked about RFK Racing quite a bit on the channel over the course of the last 2 weeks. Why we talk about him? Well, there's a lot of rumors and rumblings circulating about RFK's future. And it sounds like RFK Racing could be expanding to a three-car operation in the 2025 season. And this past weekend at Watkins Glen, Bob Pockers and multiple reporters asked Brad Keselowski's questions surrounding. He was kind of trying to play a game with Brad Keselowski a little bit, talking about what store would you go to. And Brad basically said, I go to any convenience store at this point. And Brad really did not give any inkling or update on RFK Racing's third car. Like I said, it's not going to go. RFK Racing is expected to expand to a three-car operation for the 2025 season in a third RFK car, most likely the number 60 car, which has been the Sage 60 car that has had Cam Waters behind the wheel, other drivers like David Reagan, maybe Haley D in the future, I don't know at this point, but other drivers could get the chance and opportunity to drive the 60 car. and also Joey Hand, who had a chance to win the Chicago Street Course race earlier this year. Now, if they do expand to a 3-car operation in 2025, who is going to be the third driver? It sounds like it's going to be Ryan Preece, because Kroger is going to be funding it. Apparently, Kroger really likes Ryan Preece a lot, and RFK feels like, and this is reported by Jordan Bianchi, which we'll talk about here in just a second, it was reported that RFK feels like that Ryan Preece has not been given the chance and opportunity to really prove what he's capable of. And I 100% agree with this. I think Ryan Preece has not really had the opportunity and shot to prove himself in top-tier equipment or really good equipment. Ryan Preece has been in mid-pack equipment in the NASCAR Cup Series or back-of-the-pack equipment. When he's been in really good equipment in the lower series, he's been super competitive. He won 2 Xfinity Series races with Joe Gibbs Racing in the number 18 and the 20 car. Got that win in 2017 in the 20. And, of course, went on to win in the number 18 car, Bristol, in 2018. And his select truck series starts for Tricon Garage, which was David Gill Racing at the time when they were a Ford organization. He won 2 races at National Super Speedway and had some pretty competitive runs, even driving for RFK Racing back in the day. And I feel like if you give Ryan Preece a great opportunity, he's going to do very well. You look at basically what Ryan Preece has had the last few years. When he drove for JTG, they were not the fastest organization out there. They really struggled for the few years. Chris Buescher really wasn't great in that car either, and he went to RFK Racing and were super competitive right from the get-go. So their talent is definitely there, and I think that Ryan Preece is a guy who can prove it. Plus at SHR, I know some will say, well, Noah Grayson's done a lot better, and the other drivers done better. Yes, Noah Grayson's done better, there's no denying that, but he's been in the 41 car. When is the last time the 41 car was a championship contender in NASCAR? 2018. And that was when Kurt Busch, who is one of the most underrated drivers in NASCAR history today, he was able to be a championship contender. Dale Swartz struggled in the 41 car, and Cole Custer didn't do great. And I look at the stats between Custer and Preece, while he's not been amazingly better, he's been slightly better than Cole Custer has been. So I certainly think that if you give Ryan Preece a shot and opportunity, I think you make the best of it. Again, the other big question we have to ask is, where is this charter likely coming from? It sounds like from a lot of reports that have been reported, it sounds like this charter could be coming from Rick Ware. I know some have said probably from the Stewart-Haas Racing fire sale, but we do believe at this point that 2311 Racing, if they do sign a charter agreement, they're going to get the final Stewart-Haas Racing charter. We know Trackhouse has picked up one of the SHR charters for SVG. We know Former Motorsports, while they still haven't signed a charter agreement, we know they got his charter, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. And obviously RFK could have gotten it, but I think it's going to come from Rick Ware, considering the fact that RFK has a really big technical alliance with Rick Ware Racing. I think the 15 charter goes over to RFK next year. We'll basically talk about who will get the 51 car at this point, but I think Ryan Preece is a good driver. Now, some will probably say Matt DiBenedetto deserves a shot in this car, or someone else like a Zane Smith, but I think Zane Smith's going to be in a good position going into next year and probably be in a better opportunity. Now, realistically, if Ryan Preece gets behind the wheel of this car, how do I think he's going to do? Well, realistically, I think he'll be solid. I don't think he's going to be as good as Buescher or Keselowski's been, but I think he can go out there and contend for a win. Realistically, I think that he's going to be fast. The 60 car has been competitive this year, and whoever they get him to work with, don't get Chad Johnson to be the crew chief, by the way, but whoever they end up getting to work with Ryan Preece and RFK next year, I think they're going to be competitive. And I think in the future as well, you're going to see them go to Xfinity. And I think you're going to see them make moves to other series, maybe back to the truck series, maybe get an IMSA program started, considering they're very interested in opening up an IMSA program in the near future. I think RFK, they're showing their stuff. They've got multiple wins this year, 2 wins so far in the 2024 season. Brad has really made that program a lot better, and I think that them expanding next year is going to be huge for them and NASCAR as a whole. So I'm excited about this for sure, and I think it's really great to see they're likely going to expand, and I do 100% believe they're going to be super competitive and super fast in the 2025 NASCAR season. It's going to be really exciting and fun to watch, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about NASCAR's silly season once again. Now, I kind of talked about the story this past Friday, but I kind of want a little more touch on some of the big stories that came out from that article. Let's begin by talking about some of the smaller stories from that article. We know that Daniel Hemric most likely will not be behind the wheel of the number 31 car for RFK Racing in 2025. It sounds like Daniel Hemric's future is very murky and is in question currently at the moment. The favorite to replace Daniel Hemric in the number 31 car is most likely going to be Ty Dillon. Ty Dillon is a favorite to drive a 31 car, considering Ty Dillon has had a previous working relationship and has been driving for RFK Racing in the NASCAR Cup Series part-time. In addition to that, also, he was rumored at one point to be full-time with RFK for the 2024 season. I think this is the right opportunity for him, and I do think while he may not be the fastest driver out there, it may just be okay. He's not going to set the world on fire. He brings sponsorship and his work with RFK in the past. Obviously, RFK Racing was mentioned, and like it talked about a little ago, Ryan Preece sounds like is going to be the driver. We also talk about 2311. If they do get a third car, Riley Herbst will be the driver, but there's no guarantees at this point. But now let's move on to the big four stories. Let's start off by talking about Corey LaJoie. Now, Corey LaJoie talked about earlier getting a top 10 finish, even though it caused a lot of controversy. I did a video discussing this, but it sounds like Corey LaJoie, despite the fact there are rumors about him going back down to the Truck Series, most likely if McAnally Hilgeman Racing for next year, it sounds like Corey LaJoie is going to be staying in the Cup Series in 2025. Now, what ride is he likely going to get? He is likely going to end up in the number 51 car for Rick Ware Racing. Rick Ware apparently likes Corey LaJoie quite a bit, and I think Corey LaJoie kind of likes that underdog story a bit. So I do think that you'll end up seeing him in the 51. Now, realistically, I think he'll do worse than Justin Haley, in my opinion. Because I think while Justin Haley isn't the greatest driver out there, he's still a really solid driver, in my opinion. And while Corey LaJoie is an okay driver, he's not a driver that's going to set the world on fire for you. So I don't think Corey LaJoie is going to get into the seat and do an absolutely great job. So what does this mean for Justin Haley? Well, don't you worry, Justin Haley fans. It's basically the worst kept secret at this point that Justin Haley most likely is going to be headed over to Spire Motorsports in 2025 to drive the number 7 car. There obviously have been reports he was considered for Hendrick Motorsports seat for this year, and it's no secret that the people at Hendrick Motorsports really like Justin Haley. So they like what they see, they like the talent that he has, and they feel like that Justin Haley in a top-tier car would be really, really good. Remember, Rodney Childers is going to be the crew chief of this number 7 car for next year. So having Rodney over there to oversee and help this program grow, that is going to be absolutely huge. And you think about Spire. They're going to have Michael McDowell next year in the 71 car with Travis Peterson as the crew chief. They're also, of course, going to keep Carson Hocevar, who I think has got a lot of raw talent, and I think he's got a lot of potential to be one of the best young drivers we've seen and could be a Cup Series champion in the future, whichever organization he ends up going to. So Justin Haley most likely is going to end up in this seat. Moving on to the second biggest story, Alex Bowman. There has been a lot of discussion about Alex Bowman maybe losing his seat at Hendrick Motorsports and not having a ride next year or going to the 7. Well, this past week it was pretty much confirmed with how well Alex Bowman has been running. I don't see Alex Bowman leaving the 48 car at least for the next 2 years. They're committed to him, which makes a lot of sense. I know there's always these rumors about Alex Bowman that always come up about him losing his seat and about him losing his ride. I think it'd be foolish for Hendrick Motorsports to get rid of Alex Bowman. I think he deserves to be in the seat, honestly. He's done a really great job the last 2 weeks. He's been the best Hendrick car really the last 2 weeks especially, and he's basically the second or first highest in the standings right now when it comes to the points. So it would make no sense whatsoever to get rid of Alex Bowman, who's been your best driver at the organization this year. It would be stupid for them to do it, and I don't think they're going to do it. I think they're going to make the smart play. I think they're going to make the smart decision and keep Alex Bowman at least for the next 2 years. Now, if Bowman struggles in the future, he could end up losing his seat, but I realistically do not think that is going to happen. I think he's going to be sticking around in that 48 car for the next 2 years, even if rumors continue to spiral out of control about him losing his ride. I don't see Alex Bowman going anywhere anytime soon, in my honest opinion. And finally, what you probably clicked on, let's talk about Zane Smith. A couple weeks ago, Kevin Harvick basically said that he did not think that Zane Smith was going to be driving for Front Row. The reason he said that was because he thought Ford was not going to be very happy with him. You do have to remember one big key thing. He has drivers that are not signed next year in the organizations. He was probably trying to play a role by trying to say that his drivers like Harrison Burton and Riley Herbst, which we know Harrison Burton has had Cup interest come into play, that could be looking to pick him up. But apparently what was reported by Jordan Bianchi this past week is people over at Front Row Motorsports really like him. And I 100% understand. He was really highly regarded over there at Front Row Motorsports. He, of course, won a Truck Series championship in 2022 in the number 38 car. It did make select starts in 2023 for them and actually got a top 10 in the number 38 car when, of course, Todd Gillen did drive there. Obviously, they had to make a tough decision back in 2023 when Zane decided to go over to Trackhouse Racing. I think Zane reuniting with Front Row absolutely makes a lot of sense. I think Zane is really starting to show all of his potential. He just picked up a top 5 at Watkins Glen, and his average finish has been improving drastically. He's been getting better as the second half of the year has gone on. I know why Trackhouse made the decision they made, because I don't think Zane is going to be giving you much of an opportunity shot to go out there and win races. But I think when you look at raw potential and raw talent out there, Zane's got a lot of potential. And I think in the second half of the year especially, he has shown a lot of potential. And I think a team with Noah Gragson, Zane Smith, and of course the other driver, Todd Gillen, is going to be a very strong dynamic duo. So I think Zane is going to end up here next year. I think, of course, if Front Row doesn't sign the charter agreement, by the way, I think we'll see Zane Smith end up over here in 2025. Some other notable things that were not talked about in this article: Harrison Burton's future is still a little uncertain. No, he talked to the media this past couple weeks, said he did have something maybe lined up for Cup. I still think he likely ends up in the NASCAR Xfinity Series next year in some sort of capacity, maybe AM Racing, but there's no guarantees at this point. Moving on to drivers in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Chandler Smith is likely out of Joe Gibbs Racing at the end of the year from what I'm hearing, so I think that Chandler Smith may end up somewhere else in the lower series, maybe with another organization. Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Haas Factory next year. Taylor Gray, William Swallow are likely going to Joe Gibbs Racing next year. And there's some other drivers that are going to be looking for rides going into 2025, like a Haley Deegan perhaps, or some drivers that are looking for other seats. But I look at Zane Smith going back to Front Row, and it makes a ton of sense. And also, of course, Brandon Jones at JGR, Conor Zillich with JRM. But Zane Smith going back to Front Row makes a ton of sense. I think he's going to be super competitive over at Front Row next year, and I think he's going to have a really strong chance, a really strong shot, and a great opportunity to be super competitive, and I think he could do really great. I think a combination of these three young drivers that you can work to build around, that is what you need to do if you're Front Row. In my honest opinion, I think Zane ends up here, and I think he'll be pretty competitive with this organization in 2025 if he truly ends up going there in 2025. So, that is going to today's NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support on Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. Think Zane Smith's going back to Front Row? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And do you think RFK is actually expanding? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I don't think I'm going to have any more videos dropping today on the channel. Tomorrow we're likely going to have a little silly season update on some of the big silly season stories that are coming out recently. And we're also likely to have Truck Series race picks for this weekend at Bristol. Then tomorrow on Wednesday we'll basically have the NASCAR news video again, Xfinity Series race picks, and then Thursday we'll have Cup race picks, paint scheme video, and Truck Series race view for Bristol. Got a lot of great content dropping that I cannot wait for you guys to check out. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.